there was a protest in LA recently. And if you watch the news, they kind of glossed over, for the most part, the biggest part of it. So I want to start by showing you how the news covered this. But basically what happened is it was a Code Pink protest, and they were auctioning off land in Gaza at this synagogue in LA. And so a protest showed up. But watch how the actual, mainstream, this is Fox News actually, just to show you, MSNBC, CNN, they're bad. Fox is just as bad. The idea that any of these corporate news outlets are any better than the other, they're all terrible. But watch, this is Fox News's coverage of this protest, just to show you how terrible they were anyway on this. So this is an area I know really well. This is the Robertson district of Beverly Hills in West LA. A lot of Hasidic Jews in this area. Very, very Jewish area, by the way.
Violence breaking out over the weekend in Los Angeles after a group of anti-Israel agitators blocked the entrance to a synagogue.
So right there, this is how they frame it. A group of anti-Israel agitators blocked the entrance to a synagogue,
sending fists flying in the riot police response. Chief Correspondent Jonathan Hunt is live in Los Angeles with the latest. Hello, Jonathan.
Good morning, Mike. They were extraordinary scenes, pitched battles being fought between pro-Palestinian protesters.
I love how they get these British guys that sound all official. Good evening, sir. Sporty Dick and tea and protests.
Who targeted a synagogue and members of that synagogue and of the Jewish community that surrounds it. This all taking place in the heart of Los Angeles, in the middle of one of the city's largest Jewish communities. About 100 pro-Palestinian.
Now, that is true. That is a very Jewish part of Los Angeles, but Los Angeles in general is a very Jewish city. I mean, there's a Jewish population, very large Jewish population where I live. There's very large Jewish population all over the city. So, I mean, it's much like New York, I would say, in that respect.
Protesters descended on the area Sunday morning, and almost immediately violence broke out as those protesters tried to block the entrance to the Adass Torah synagogue. Jewish counter-protesters tried to push
They tried to block the entrance. That's all he's telling you.
them back, and for some time, violent fights broke out between the two sides.
When they're screaming globalize the Intifada, they're screaming kill Jews for being Jews. And, no, not going to let that happen.
Riot police intervened to try to keep the two groups apart and clear the pro-Palestinian protesters from the Jewish neighborhood. But tensions remained high for several hours. And at one point, at least 8 officers with weapons drawn ordered 2 pro-Palestinian protesters from their car, clearly concerned the vehicle itself could be used as a weapon. Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass condemned the protest.
Ban vehicles. That's an inside joke.
Protesters saying, quote, today's violence in the Pico Robertson neighborhood was abhorrent and blocking access to a place.
Abhorrent? See, these British guys aren't so classy. Are they abhorrent? He's slightly dyslexic.
Place of worship is unacceptable. I want to be clear that Los Angeles will not be a harbor for anti-Semitism and violence. Those responsible for either will be found and held accountable. Now, Mike, I spoke to Rabbi Chaim Mentz of the nearby Chabad of Bel Air as the violence was playing out yesterday. He told me he found it reminiscent of the Nazi youth on the streets of Germany in the 1930s. And he said, who would ever have thought we would see this on the streets of American cities? Mike?
Deeply disturbing visuals. Jonathan Hunt, thanks very much.
Sure.
So that's Fox News's coverage of the LA protest, which is close to me. I was not there, but I know the area. Now here is Max and Aaron's take on the protests, and let's see how their viewpoints differ from Fox News here.
On 2 of those themes you just brought up, in Los Angeles, in West LA, at a synagogue hosted another auction for stolen land in the illegally occupied Palestinian West Bank for settlement units, illegal settlement units, which is a violation of international law and a war crime. And so basically a war crime is being sponsored inside a synagogue. If there was like fundraising for ISIS inside a mosque in the US, I don't think people would respond very positively in the community, and they're doing it openly. But what happened here is the synagogue, which is encouraging anti-Semitism by carrying out these heinous acts inside its walls, by uniting the Jewish faith with crimes against people who are occupied.
So you'll notice at no point in that Fox News breakdown did they mention the protest or the motives behind the protest. They just said anti-Israel protest agitators, actually is the word they used, blocked the door to a synagogue, basically.
They played the victim.
And honestly, they played the victim. I would not doubt if they set it up that way on purpose so that they could play that card, but let's keep going.
Of course. And pretended like they were being attacked simply because they're a synagogue and simply because they're Jewish. Of course they would do that. I mean, this is a scene from outside the synagogue, and you can see it's the Zionist hooligans who are attacking the anti-genocide protesters. They eventually just start beating him. They start beating him, and the cops, there's LAPD right there. Are you going to do something or what? He said. And they push him away and do nothing.
Now you see why the mainstream press calls Max and Aaron in the gray zone disinformation all the time and tries to associate them with Russia and enemy, like, you know, the declared enemies of the United States.
These are the same thugs that attacked students at UCLA for protesting genocide. And of course, it was framed as though it was some kind of pogrom by someone who used to be actually a black radical in the Bay Area, Van Jones.
This is really interesting. This shows you how far the quote unquote progressive left has fallen.
And this was the whole media take. Like, you can look at mainstream articles in Yahoo News or Bloomberg about this protest. They don't tell you what was happening inside the synagogue, that the synagogue was involved in international legal violations. This is Van Jones.
At the same time, I think it's a little bit naive for some people to think that if Israel would just suddenly just stop doing what it's doing, that rainbows and bunnies and sunshine would break out over the Middle East and it would all be fine. The hostages have to be returned. You can call for a ceasefire on both sides. Hamas is still firing its rockets. They still have hostages kidnapped. So this is a complex issue, but here's what's not complicated.
That's what a ceasefire is, dummy.
This can be complicated. Geopolitics can be really complicated. How you treat your neighbors, how you treat people in your community is not complicated.
That's beautiful, man.
Don't run up. I haven't seen any Jewish people running up on mosques with Israeli flags. If they did that, I'd be denouncing that too. There's certain.
Well, they have. They also brutally assaulted students at UCLA right down the street. They were assaulting people at that event.
Things you don't do. It is a red line. If you want to be a part of a protest and they say, we're going to go to a Jewish community center, we're going to go to a mosque, we're going to go to a Jewish restaurant. That's not a protest. That's a pogrom. That's an anti-Jewish bigoted act. If you want to be a part of a protest, let's go to a mosque. Let's go and harass the Muslims. That's not a protest. So we've got to get clear in our country what is a fair protest about policy, you can agree or disagree, and what's going after people, human beings, terrifying moms, grandmas, children who are trying to be a part of a neighborhood.
Why don't you go back to your home on Whore Island?
The Jewish neighborhoods in LA are well known. Nobody is confused where they are. So if you show up there wearing a keffiyeh, you show up there with your face covered, you show up there chanting "River to the Sea," that would be just like a white person running up with a Confederate flag in Harlem. You're not trying to start a conversation. You're trying to start a fight. Stop doing that. Don't do that. We don't want more violence. We don't want more fear. We don't want more terrified people. We've got to be able to come together as a country. If either side had an easy answer, it'd have been solved. I'm less concerned about the politicians now. I'm concerned about the people in my community in Los Angeles moving in a direction that is more and more dangerous, more and more scary, more and more destructive. The Jewish community does not need to have people doing those types of things. It's not helping anybody in Palestine, but it's making America a much less safe place for everybody.
ADL is played out. Nobody knows who the ADL are. Stop giving them attention. Nobody cares about the ADL.
Maoist leader Van Jones.
So many just falsehoods in there. And just the premise of his point, like if there was a mosque complicit in mass murder and land theft, of course it'd be fair game to protest them.
Yeah.
You know, places of worship are not exempt from protests, you know, if they're supporting war crimes.
No one in high school knew what the word anti-Semitic was until Ye made it popular.
So I want to play you. This actually surprised me because Max and Aaron have a clearly different take on this protest than Fox News does. But this was CNN, or not CNN. Well, CNN had Van Jones. This is actually NBC's take on the protest, which is surprisingly
Scene in West Los Angeles over the weekend. Violence broke out between a group of pro-Palestinian protesters and supporters of Israel outside a synagogue. Video from the scene Sunday appears to show people yelling at each other. And
so it's a little more balanced, as you can see. It's not like anti-Israel agitators block a synagogue. It's like, hey, pro-Palestinian and pro-Israel protesters clash. So a little bit, you know, I'll give NBC credit here. A little bit more fair coverage than we've seen anywhere else so far.
there are reports of people throwing punches and using protest signs as weapons. Police in riot gear were called in to break up the tense situation. NBC News correspondent David Noriega has been following this story for us from Los Angeles. So, David, we've seen a lot of protests over the last few months, but how serious did this end up being, and have any arrests been made?
Yeah, Zinkley, I mean, this was serious, if only because of the amount of attention that it's getting, including from elected officials at local, state, and national levels. Even the president posted a tweet about it, mostly because this protest and the altercations happened outside of a synagogue in a very heavily Jewish part of West LA. Now, the reason that there was a protest at that synagogue in the first place is because there was an event being held in the synagogue promoting real estate in Israel, including with participation from a company that has in the past promoted property listings in Israeli settlements in the West Bank. That is why.
There you go. He actually said it. Props to NBC for being fair in their coverage here. I was very surprised when I saw this. He actually said they were protesting because they were selling real estate in the West Bank.
Protesters targeted this particular event. Now, it did devolve into violence. The LAPD says that there were several physical altercations between protesters and counter-protesters, and there was one arrest of a person at the protest who was carrying what the police described as a spiked pole, presumably some kind of sign or flagpole. The LAPD also says that it's investigating 2 official reports of battery. Now, in terms of violence, this is certainly less than what we saw during the encampment on the UCLA campus here in LA a couple of months ago. But again, in terms of the amount of attention that it's getting, and any kind of violence around this particular issue is going to be significant and something that's going to get a lot of attention. Sinclair?
Always important reporting. David Noriega, thank you so much.
So props to David Noriega and NBC for having a fair and balanced take. Remember when that was Fox News's slogan, fair and balanced, back in the early days of their right-wing agenda? They're totally neocons. Let's not get it twisted. And so is MSNBC. So I was very surprised to see that balance of coverage on. That's not MSNBC. That's just NBC. So maybe there's a difference. I don't know. Whatever the case, that's a protest that was close to me. And I remember seeing the coverage and going, wait a minute, they're leaving some stuff out. So as you can see from CNN and Fox's coverage, very, very slanted in a certain direction. And it's always good to have Max and Aaron's perspective. But also for me personally, I criticize the media a lot, and I definitely need to pay closer attention to what the corporate media is saying, because I talk a lot of shit, and every once in a while they'll surprise me by doing something right, like NBC just did there. So